My daughter's voice cracked with emotion when she said, "Dad, come to dinner. Let's be family again." I walked into her $700,000 mansion with hope. But then I saw documents waiting on the table, and her husband's whisper about millions sent chills through me. Family betrayal cuts the deepest. That night was no reunion. It was war. You won't believe what I did next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat alone in the living room that had carried me through decades of joy and grief, the same room where Margaret and I had celebrated birthdays, where we once stayed up late watching the 11 o'clock news, where Rebecca took her first steps on the hardwood floor I installed with my own hands. The evening light poured in through the window, golden and tired, making the framed pictures on the walls look older than they were. My eyes landed on Rebecca's graduation photo, the cap crooked on her head, her smile wide as if the world was hers. That day had cost me $60,000 in tuition fees spread across 4 long years. Every check I wrote, every double shift I picked up at the restaurant was for her. Margaret and I lived with less, cut back on vacations, skipped dinners out so she could graduate without debt. Later, when she finished school, she asked for a car to help her commute to her first job. I bought her one, a $25,000 sedan, even though I still drove my old pickup with a dented door and a heater that barely worked. She hugged me back then, called me the best dad in the world. I believed her. I thought of all those sacrifices as I looked around this house. 40 years of sweat and calloused hands, 40 years of Margaret balancing ledgers at the kitchen table, while I came home smelling of grease and onions. This house, worth $500,000 now, was not just wood and stone. It was our entire marriage, a safe place to raise a child, a shelter built with every overtime hour I survived. My savings account, $300,000 carefully put away over decades, was supposed to protect me in old age. But I had seen enough, heard enough, to know that Rebecca and her husband were circling like vultures. They wanted it all, the house, the money, even the dignity of deciding how I lived my final years. The thought of them selling this house and pushing me into a nursing home as if I were an unwanted burden made my stomach twist. I could almost hear Margaret's voice in the silence. "Every dollar here is a piece of us. Don't let anyone treat it like nothing." The shock from the night before still clung to me like a wet coat. I had walked into Rebecca's grand home, into that polished life she wanted me to admire, and I had believed for a brief moment that forgiveness was possible. But then I saw the legal papers with my name on them. I heard Mark whispering about debts, about millions owed, about how once I signed, everything would be theirs. The betrayal sat heavily on my chest, heavier than any debt I ever carried. I whispered into the empty room, almost like a prayer. "Margaret, you would never forgive me if I let them trample on what we built." My hand trembled, not from weakness, but from anger, turning into resolve. I had been blindsided, yes, but I was not powerless. I was not some confused old man they could trick into giving away his life's work. I leaned back in the worn armchair, the one Margaret had insisted we buy because it supported my back, and I studied the details of the room. The wedding photo above the fireplace, both of us young and certain that love would protect us forever. The old mantel clock still ticking faintly, its sound filling the silence in a way that made the house feel alive. The afternoon sunlight turned everything amber, highlighting the dust on the bookshelves, the lines in the photographs, the scratches on the coffee table where Rebecca once did her homework. It was a room full of ghosts, but also a room full of reminders. Loss weighed on me, but so did duty. This emptiness did not weaken me. It hardened me. It told me that what I had left was worth defending. I pushed myself up, walked to the cabinet where I kept my important documents, and pulled out the folders that smelled faintly of old paper and ink. There it was, the life insurance policy Margaret and I had taken out when Rebecca was still a little girl. The deed to the house, my name printed clearly as the owner. My will, updated after Margaret passed, is still intact and untouched. I laid them out on the table one by one, like weapons ready for battle. These were not just papers. They were proof. Proof of ownership, proof of effort, proof that my life was mine to control. I thought of calling my lawyer right then, of locking everything down before Rebecca could make another move. But I didn't pick up the phone yet. Instead, I touched the corner of the house deed, then the photo of Margaret beside it. I whispered, "I will not let them erase you, not with ink, not with lies." The more I stared at the documents, the more I felt something inside me shifting. The grief that had left me hollow after Margaret died began to curl into something sharper: determination. They thought I was weak. They thought I was lonely enough, desperate enough to be fooled. They thought wrong. My heart pounded harder, not from fear, but from clarity. For the first time since the betrayal revealed itself, I felt strong. Not young, no, but strong in the way a tree grows stronger with deep roots, unshaken by storms. I remembered what Margaret used to tell me every time business got rough. "You've built too much to let it fall now." I sat back down, the papers neatly arranged before me, and my eyes drifted once more to Margaret's photograph. The afternoon had grown darker, the room bathed in the orange light of sunset. Outside, I could hear the faint sounds of Brooklyn, cars honking, kids playing on the sidewalk, someone's radio spilling a tune from an open window. The world went on, but inside this house, a war was beginning. A war not of guns or fists, but of wills, of ink, of who had the right to define the end of my story. I thought of Rebecca's smile at graduation, her voice when she called me Dad with pride. That girl was gone. What remained was a woman so blinded by greed she could betray the very hands that raised her. My chest ached, but my resolve was clear. I gathered the documents back into the folder, placed it firmly on the coffee table, and reached for Margaret's framed photo once more. Her eyes, frozen in time, seemed to hold me steady, seemed to say the words she had spoken so many times before. Do the right thing, even when it's hard. I held the frame close, breathed in the familiar smell of old paper and wood polish, and said aloud, "It's time. Time to face the truth. Time to protect what's ours." The weight of betrayal was still heavy, but beneath it now was something stronger. Resolve. They had played their hand. Now it was my turn. I woke before sunrise with a clear plan in my head and a knot in my stomach. The plan steadied me. The knot warned me what was at stake. I sat at the kitchen table with the folder open, the deed on top, the life insurance policy beneath, my will below that. The mantel clock ticked a patient beat. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a truck coughed and moved on. This house, the rooms Margaret and I cleaned on Saturdays, felt like a body breathing under my hands. I called Mr. Harrison the minute his office opened. He answered on the second ring, steady as always. I told him what I had seen in Rebecca's dining room, the polished smiles, the questions about my money, the way Mark whispered about timing, and the folder on the sideboard with my name on a line that read, Power of Attorney. I told him I feared they meant to corner me. He listened without interrupting, and then laid out my guardrails in simple words. Do not sign anything, not one thing. If they hand you a pen, put your hands in your pockets. He had me read the account numbers I wanted protected, the savings I built one breakfast rush at a time, $300,000 that still felt like a miracle when I saw it on paper. He told me to place a fraud alert and set a password for any transaction over a small limit. He said he would draft a revocation of any power of attorney that might appear with my name on it, genuine or forged or accidentally prepared. He spoke like a carpenter building a straight wall, brick by brick, word by word. When we hung up, I wrote the password on an index card and slid it into my wallet. It was the name of Margaret's childhood street, spelled the old way only she and I got right. The choice felt like a small prayer. I brewed coffee, held the mug for warmth, then poured it down the sink. I put the papers back into the folder, slid the folder into my old leather bag, and walked to the bank at opening. The branch smelled like lemon cleaner and printer toner. A woman in a navy jacket with her sleeves pushed up led me into a glass office. Her name tag said Patel. I told her one word, family, and then told her what I needed: a hard block on large withdrawals, a password check on any transaction over $2,000, and a live confirmation call even if a signature looked perfect. She did not blink. She printed forms, checked my license twice, and had me recite the password softly. She stamped a letter with the date and time in the corner and slid her card on top. "Call me first if anything feels even a little strange," she said. I thanked her and walked out with the letter in my bag, feeling both lighter and older. On a bench outside, I called Mr. Harrison back. He had the revocation ready. I walked 10 blocks to his office because walking loosens the rope. Worry wraps around a man's chest. The notary's stamp was a heavy click that felt like a door locking. Mr. Harrison made 3 copies, slid the original into a thick envelope, and gave me the others. He said he would file a notice with the county so any surprise title activity would hit a tripwire. He repeated his first instruction: "Do not sign anything." I heard Margaret in the quiet that followed. Her mouth set, her eyes are kind, her chin lifted. I ironed a clean shirt, the blue one she liked. I polished my shoes until they showed the kitchen light. I tucked Mr. Harrison's card into my inside pocket and slid the bank letter beside it. I touched Margaret's picture on the mantel. "Stay with me," I whispered, and the room answered with quiet. The car ride to Montclair felt longer than last time, as if distance had stretched with the truth. Brooklyn slid behind us. The bridge rose and fell. The highway unfurled like a ribbon, then narrowed into streets lined with hedges trimmed to a ruler's edge. Rebecca's place could have been a museum. Stone columns. A curved drive around a fountain that threw coins of light on the water. She opened the door before I could knock. She hugged me and told me I looked great. She smelled like a perfume strip torn from a magazine. Mark stepped in with bright teeth and took my bag the way a bellman would, placing it by the coat rack without asking. I watched his hands. I watched where the bag landed. He said tonight was about family and fresh starts. The words sounded rehearsed, like lines said until they no longer meant anything. They led me through rooms arranged to impress. White couches that do not spill. Books stacked for color, not reading. Framed art so abstract it felt like a dare. The dining room table wore a white cloth and a regiment of silver. The chandelier cast a warm light that made the glasses sparkle. For a heartbeat, I felt Margaret beside me, a hand on my sleeve, teasing me for checking whether the forks matched. The space where she should have been felt cooler than the rest of the room. Rebecca poured me a whiskey without asking. She poured wine for herself. Mark poured his own whiskey and swallowed too much at once. I lifted my glass and let the scent sit under my nose, oak and smoke and a hint of sweetness, then set it down. I reached for water instead. Rebecca noticed. She smiled as if I had passed a small test. We toasted Margaret. It was the one clean note in the room. I let the glass touch my lips, but did not drink. Mark broke the silence with a question about the restaurants. He asked which location did the best business now, whether I had thought about the future of the brand, and whether I had a transition plan to protect what I had built. He liked the word protect. He said it twice. Rebecca asked about my knees, about stairs, about elevators, about condos. Concern can be shaped like kindness and taste like power. I answered simply. The managers are strong. Business is steady. I enjoy the work. The stairs are fine. I have not looked at condos. I am not lonely when the morning sun hits the kitchen table and the block wakes up. Mark smiled like a man who hears no as a temporary sound. He spoke about the market. He said houses like mine do not come along every day. He said I could get top dollar now and not later. He said cashing out at the peak is how winners think. He said winners as if he had a trophy in his pocket. Maria appeared with the roast, steam rolling off the platter. She set it down and stepped back. Her eyes met mine for a half second. Not a plea, not a warning, not a message you could carry in your hand, and yet it felt like all three. We ate. The gravy tasted like someone had taken time. I said so. Rebecca looked pleased, the way a hostess looks when the show is working. Mark drifted back to numbers. He asked what my house might appraise for if we polished it up. He asked if my savings were earning enough. He asked if I had considered consolidating accounts to make emergencies easier. He said emergencies are like a man selling insurance. I set down my fork and folded my hands. I prefer to keep things simple, I said. Simple for me means me. He laughed as if I had made a joke and touched his glass to his lip. I reached for my water and let my eyes travel, not hunting, just moving the way tired eyes move. The sideboard sat to my left, polished until the wood looked like a pond. On the lower shelf, a cream folder leaned against folded napkins. The top page had slipped forward. The bold line was impossible to miss. Power of Attorney, Jonathan Miller. The air thinned. Rebecca took one smooth step and stood where the shelf fell out of my sight. Her smile brightened by a single watt. "Just housekeeping," she said, and turned the smile toward Mark. I lifted my knife and cut another slice of meat. I chewed. I drank water. "Not yet," I heard Margaret say, the way I sometimes heard her in the hard years. "Breathe." Mark spoke about Sundays, about holidays, about family closeness. He painted a picture with soft edges. He said he knew a realtor who could work miracles. He said, "Miracle the way a magician says, watch the handkerchief." I said, "I like my doctors where they are." I said, "I like my neighbors." I said, "I like hearing the school bell down the street at 8:30. Rebecca's voice softened. "Dad, you live alone. Why make it harder than it needs to be?" The word Dad still had weight. It did not have warmth. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, "I am not in the business of making my life smaller." He tried memory next. He talked about the time he and I painted the fence. He reminded me of a game we watched on television. He took small coins from the past and tried to buy the present with them. Lonely people will sometimes sell cheaply. I am lonely. I am not for sale. Dessert came on small white plates. Custard with a thin crust that cracked under a spoon. Rebecca refilled my whiskey with a flourish that said, "See, we are relaxed." I lifted the glass and studied the amber like a winter sunset caught in crystal. I set it down again. A beautiful thing can be bait. Mark cleared his throat. He asked how the leases were written, whether any were month to month, whether managers signed for deliveries, whether anyone else had a key to the safe, and whether I had changed the combination after Margaret died. Each question carried a little ring of nails. I answered less. I let silence do some of the talking. "They think I am weak," my inner voice said, and the words did not shake. "They think a heavy glass and gentle pressure will do the trick. They think wrong." I pushed my chair back an inch and stood. I walked to the doorway and pretended to admire a painting of a ship in a storm. In the glass I saw the reflection of the table. Mark leaned close to Rebecca. His lips moved in a whisper he thought belonged to the air. On the floor by the sideboard, a fountain pen with a gold clip lay in the shadow like a snake worming on a rock. It had not fallen. It had been placed where a tired man might stoop and sign. I returned to the table and complimented the dessert and asked about the vanilla. Rebecca laughed and said a friend had a source. I said secrets in houses like this tend to find light. I said it with a smile. The sentence landed heavier than it sounded. Mark suggested we move to the study to talk through next steps. Paperwork only, nothing serious, just to make things easier. Next steps clicked in my ear like the lid of a box. "Coffee first," I said. I poured my own black and carried it like it weighed something. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment one below to let me know you're here with me. The study smelled like leather and lemon oil. Wood paneling turned the light to honey. A wide desk sat under a landscape that had never met rain. Mark took the chair behind the desk. Rebecca perched on the sofa arm. On the desk sat a neat stack of papers with blue, yellow, and red tabs. He spoke about efficiency and protection and peace of mind. He said I deserved ease. He said the word ease like it was a pill I ought to swallow. I folded my hands and listened until he stopped. I adjusted my glasses. I cleaned a smudge that was not there with the handkerchief Margaret gave me one Christmas. I looked at my daughter. I looked back at her husband. "I appreciate the trouble you've gone to," I said, "and I will not be signing anything tonight." The words felt like stones laid across a stream. Rebecca blinked. Mark blinked. The air shifted. "Read them, Dad," she said. "There's no harm in reading. I said I would read them at my table with my lawyer on the phone." Mark's smile drained at the edges. He told me I was stubborn. I said I had earned the right to be careful. He slid the top paper toward me anyway and tapped a highlighted paragraph with his pen. He called it minor authorization for routine matters. He loved the word minor. I repeated myself gently. Not tonight. Rebecca tried kindness again. She touched my sleeve and spoke of worry and the long nights she lay awake. Help is a word that depends on who says it and who hears it, I said. She let her hand fall as if the fabric had grown hot. Mark straightened the stack until the corners were square. He told me I was making a mistake. I told him I had stopped making the biggest one. I stood and asked for the restroom. Cold water shocked the heat out of my hands. I looked at my face in the mirror. The man looking back was older, yes, but his mouth was steady. "They think I've already lost," I whispered. "The game just began." I dried my hands and returned. When I came back, the papers were gone from the desk. A framed wedding photo sat in their place, tidy and bright. Rebecca smiled as if nothing had passed between us. Mark said he had an early meeting. He asked if I wanted coffee for the ride. We walked to the foyer in a polite row. Somewhere in the kitchen, a timer beeped twice and stopped. I lifted my bag from the rack and felt the weight of the envelope inside. It steadied me like a hand on the shoulder. At the door, Rebecca hugged me again. She held on a second too long. She said she loved me. I said I loved her too. Truth is complicated. Mark shook my hand, overly firm, as if agreement might squeeze out. I thanked them for dinner and said the roast was excellent. I told them I was tired and needed rest. The night air outside felt clean and honest. The driver pulled up. I got in with relief that felt like dropping a heavy bag. Highway lights strung out like beads. I leaned my head against the glass and let the hum of the tires work on the ache under my ribs. For the first time since the invitation, I felt more in control than controlled. I could almost hear Margaret the way I used to hear her at the edge of sleep. "Steady, Jonathan, steady." I answered her aloud, very quietly. I am steady. The driver did not look back. The city opened its arms. At home, I slid the envelope and the bank letter into the fireproof box in the hall closet and spun the dial. I poured a glass of water and stood by the sink with the window open, the night air moving over my face. The neighbor's wind chime made a thin sound. Somewhere, a car door closed and footsteps faded. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the dim, the way I like to when I want to feel the house settle around me. In the living room, I took down Margaret's photo and sat with it on my knees. I told her about the day. I told her about Ms. Patel, about the notary stamp, about the folder on the sideboard and the pen on the floor, about the questions that sounded like help and felt like hammers. I told her I had smiled and kept my name my own. I told her I had not drunk their whiskey. I told her I had walked out whole. The clock on the mantel counted each sentence with a soft tick. It felt like approval. Before B, D, I made a small list on a yellow pad. Bank, lawyer, copies. Next, be ready. I underlined be ready twice. I set the pad where I would see it in the morning. I turned off the last lamp, and the furnace sighed to life. In the da arche, I lay on my back and stared at the ceiling. I let myself feel the quiet that comes when you move from panic to purpose. It is not joy. It is a clean floor under your feet. I thought of Mr. Harrison's final advice. If they push, let them push against air. Stand where they do not expect you. I smiled into the dark. They expected a signature. They expected tears. They expected the same man who handed Rebecca $20,000 last year for an investment that never returned and then stayed quiet when she stopped calling. That man is gone. The father who loves his daughter remains. The husband who loves his wife remains. The owner who knows what he owns remains. They think they are writing my future. They are not holding the pen. Morning will come, I told myself. New moves will come with it. They do not know I have something folded and waiting, something that will change everything when I decide to lift it from the box. They believe they hold the script. They do not know I have written a new ending. They do not know I am ready. They do not know what I will do next. I slept with the phone on the nightstand, face up, sound high. I did not know it, but a message would flip the table I refused to touch. I felt my phone tremble under the white cloth and thought it was a pocket of air from the HVAC. It wasn't. I turned the screen over with my thumb. The message was short and bright, like a flare in fog. Get up and leave. Don't say a word. No name. No emoji. I looked at it long enough for my reflection to dim, then slid the phone back into my jacket. My mouth was warm, too warm for the small sip of whiskey I had allowed myself to be polite. The sweetness sat wrong. My tongue felt thick at the back, the way it does when you've taken a pill on an empty stomach. I set the glass down and reached for water, forcing my breath to slow. Margaret would have pressed 2 fingers into my forearm and told me to look around, not at my shoes. I looked. Calm, I told myself. Look slowly. Move slower. Rebecca asked if I liked the roast. She had set her smile like a place setting and waited for me to admire it. Mark cut his meat with the care of a surgeon and kept talking about succession, about efficiency, about how smart families plan. The words rubbed my ears raw. My hands looked steady on the table. My fingertips tingled anyway. The text burned against my ribs like a hot coin. I stood and apologized for the bathroom. Mark gestured down the hall with the performance of a man who has rehearsed hospitality. Rebecca half stood, then sat, then reached for my glass as if to freshen it. I carried my water. The powder room door was 3 steps to the left. I passed it. The kitchen door opened to soft light, dish soap, and the muted rhythm of a faucet. Maria stood at the sink with a crystal in her hands. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. She said nothing. I said nothing. It felt like standing in a church when no one else is there, when your own breath tells you what is true. The back door was 10 steps away, brass handle gleaming. I opened it and stepped into a narrow slice of night. Cool air cleared a corner of my head. A motion light snapped on. Grass shone wet. I moved along the hedges, shoes sinking a little, the way a man moves when he is too proud to run and too scared to walk slowly. The side gate gave, and the street was quiet. A dog barked 2 blocks over. I thumbed my ride app and watched the little car icon get closer. 5 minutes. Then I dialed the unknown number from the text. She answered on the 2nd ring. Her voice was careful and warm at once. I asked who she was. She told me I already knew. Maria. She didn't tell me a story. She told me facts. She said the bottle on the cart had been treated with a compound that makes alcohol 5 times stronger. She said the glaze on my slice of roast had been brushed at the table to be fresh, and that it wasn't only butter. She said the folder in the study was not a draft. It was tabbed to guide a tired hand, with my name on a power of attorney that had no expiration. She said Mark's gambling debt was $2.5 million, and that the people waiting on him were not the kind you bargain with using holiday manners. I asked her why she was risking her job. She said some debts don't belong to a paycheck. She said she had a father. She said it quietly, as if that explained everything, and it did. I told her I was calling the police. She told me to be careful with time. She told me they would notice I was gone. She said if I wanted proof, I needed to move fast. Headlights pulled into the block like a prayer answered. I got in the back seat and told the driver to head toward the highway. Then I changed my mind and told him to take me back to the house and wait around the corner. He looked at me in the mirror the way a man looks at a storm line on the horizon. I called 911. The dispatcher sounded like a school principal who has seen every trick. I gave my name, the address, and what I believed was happening. I kept my voice slow so my hands would stop shaking. The dispatcher told me units were en route and advised me not to re-enter the residence. I said I understood and told the driver to idle one street over. We turned onto the street again. The fountain in front of Rebecca's house whispered to itself like money, trying to sound innocent. I walked up the drive. The front door opened before I touched the bell. Rebecca stood there with a relief so bright it looked painted. "Dad, where did you go?" "You scared me." She reached for my arm. Mark stood behind her, his face between charm and calculation, like a man choosing which mask fits best. I told him the truth that fits in small spaces. I said the night air helped my stomach. I said I wanted water. I said I hoped dessert wasn't gone because I had a sweet tooth. We went back to the table. Maria poured from a pitcher. Her eyes stayed on the glass. Rebecca sat with perfect posture and watched me like a hawk. Mark lifted his glass as if to toast. I set mine down and rested my hands, palms flat. The knock came like a judge's gavel. 3 hard beats. "Police! Open the door." Mark's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Rebecca's face went the color of paper. I stood and walked to the foyer and pulled the door open. 2 officers stepped in, calm and square in their uniforms. They asked my name and if I was the caller. I said yes. I told them there were papers in the study tabbed for my signature and that my drink tasted wrong and that a witness in the house could describe what she heard. I said it without anger. The words felt like bricks. One officer asked if he could see the study. I gestured to the right. The folder was on the desk, cream against dark wood. Blue and yellow tabs winked at the edges. The officer put on gloves and opened it. My name, in a font that tried too hard to look serious, filled the top line. He read a paragraph and exhaled through his nose. The second officer lifted the cut crystal I had set down, tilted it toward the light, then smelled it and frowned. He collected the whiskey bottle from the cart and the little brush from the kitchen where Maria showed him. He handled everything like a man carrying a newborn. Rebecca started talking. She said I was confused. She said the documents were drafts. She said we were simply making things easier. She said her father was stubborn and tired and didn't like change. Mark added that he had consulted a lawyer and that probate is messy. He loved that word. Messy. He said it like a spell. The officer did not smile. He asked who had poured the whiskey. Rebecca said she did because she knows what I like. He asked who had prepared the glaze. She said she did because she wanted dinner to be special. She used the word special as if it were a napkin she could lay over poison. Maria stepped into the doorway and spoke in a voice that filled the room without raising itself. She said she had heard my daughter whisper in the hallway that I needed to sign tonight or they were finished, and that Mark had said, "Just pour him one more." She said she saw the brush in the kitchen and that it was used only for my plate. She said she watched me take a small sip and then set the glass down and ask for water. She stared at the floor while she said it. One officer wrote. The other officer thanked her. The officer asked me if I had any medical distress. I said my head felt hot and then clear, and that I had not drunk more than a taste, and that the water helped. He nodded and told me to sit. Another set of officers arrived. The house filled with quiet leather and radios and patient steps. A small box appeared on the dining table with labeled bags. The bottle went in. The brush went in. The glass went in. The folder went in. Mark tried another lane. He said he was in danger. He said men would hurt him. He said he owed money and had panicked. He said if he could just explain, I would understand. The officer asked how much. Mark swallowed. $2.5 million, he said. Not quite a whisper, not quite a shout. The number changed the air. It sat between us like a fifth chair. Rebecca made a sound that was not a word. I looked at my daughter and saw a little girl with skinned knees blow away like ash. I looked at my son-in-law and saw a gambler where a husband should be. I heard my own voice from somewhere steady. You had choices, I said. You chose this. You chose cards and lies. You chose a signature over a conversation. You chose to drug a father rather than tell the truth. I did not raise my voice. The words were flat. He could not outrun them. The officer said we would continue at the station. He read Mark his rights in a calm, practiced rhythm. He told Rebecca to place her hands where he could see them. She cried, then argued, then cried again. She said she had done nothing. She said she was trying to protect me. She said the papers were just ideas. The officer did not answer. He did not need to. The evidence sat in polite bags. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. At the door, Rebecca called me Dad in the voice that once got her out of curfew trouble. She asked me to say something. I said I had, and that it was enough for tonight. Mark said he would pay it all back. He said he would go to meetings. He said he would fix it. He said the things people say when the lights come up and the show ends. The door opened to the night air washed clean by blue and red. I sat alone at the dining table after they left. The chandelier purred. The silver shone. The custard on my plate had skinned over. Maria brought me water. I thanked her. She nodded once and went back to the kitchen. The room looked like a stage empty of actors, props still warm to the touch. I called Mr. Harrison. He answered on the first ring. He listened while I told him the order of things. He asked if the officers had the glass and the bottle and the brush and the papers. I said yes. He told me to meet him at the station, to drink water, and to avoid any signatures like a man avoids an open manhole. 2 officers drove me to the station, brick building, worn steps, a fluorescent hum that puts a gray film on the air. In a small room with a clean table, I gave my statement. I stuck to what I saw, what I smelled, what I heard, what I did. No guesses, no extra color. The detective read it back to me slowly. He photographed the text on my phone. He placed the phone back in my palm with care. Mr. Harrison sat beside me with his pad and a short list of boxes. He checked the first 3 while the detective talked. Evidence collected, statement recorded, property secured. From down the hall, I heard the thin rise and fall of my daughter's voice. I heard Mark on a different beat, bargaining with math. I did not stand up. I did not look through the glass. I folded my hands and counted breaths the way the doctor taught me after my heart scare 10 years back. In and out. 10, then 10 more. Mr. Harrison leaned over and spoke softly. "You kept your name tonight," he said. "People forget that a signature is a person's life." I closed my eyes and let the sentence settle. It felt like a weight that belonged in my hands. After the paperwork, a young officer handed me a paper cup of coffee and asked if I needed a ride home. I said I would sit for a minute. I looked at the brochure he offered about elder fraud. The words elder and victim did not sit right, but I slid the paper into my pocket anyway. Sometimes we wear a label to walk past the guard at the door. I stared at the bulletin board, lost dog, blood drive, flu shots, and thought of how ordinary life keeps going, no matter what we drag through its halls. Mr. Harrison laid out the morning on his pad. We would alert the banks with the report number. We would send letters to their counsel. We would file a narrow protective order to cover the house, the restaurants, and the accounts, naming me as the only signatory. We would place my revocation letter on file with the clerk again. We would ask the court for supervised contact only. He spoke in clean lines. Each line was a rung on a ladder. You climb rungs like that by not looking down. When I stepped outside, the city felt washed and new. It was after midnight. I called a car and stood under the street lamp with my collar up. The driver looked at me in the mirror and asked if I'd had a long night. I said, "The longest part is over." We drove past the diner where the night cook flips eggs for men who can't sleep, past a church that leaves its doors open for prayer, past a bodega with a cat in the window. I let the ordinary hold me. At home, the lock turned, the light clicked, the house breathed. I set Mr. Harrison's card on the counter. I slid the police report copy into the fireproof box with the deed and the life insurance policy, and the revocation letter. Paper can feel like armor when it carries your name in the right ink. I took Margaret's picture from my wallet and pressed it to my chest. I told her what happened. I told her the officers were good. I told her Maria was braver than most people I have known. I told her I had not signed a thing. I told her I had kept the house, the savings, the company that bears our fingerprints in every booth and plate and light bulb. I slept a little. Dawn slid between the blinds and drew a pale line on the floor. The phone was quiet. The knot in my stomach had loosened. There will be a court. There will be questions. There will be days when the story gets told wrong by someone who wants it that way. But the center had moved. It rested in me again. I made coffee and drank it standing up. I rinsed the cup and left it to dry. I walked to the front window and watched a man walk his dog in a sweater. The dog moved with the dignity I wanted. Slow, steady, unbothered by noise. I touched the sill Margaret painted one spring and felt the brush marks under the gloss. I whispered to her, "I am not done." The room felt warmer. Before I dressed, I read the text again. Get up and leave. Don't say a word. It had felt like a command. It was a gift. If you are lucky, life hands you one clear instruction at the right time. If you are listening, you follow it. If you are brave, you come back with help. I will say this to anyone who has been told to sit still while other people use your name to open doors. Stand, even if your knees argue. Stand anyway. You will shake. Shake and stand. Walk toward the air. It will hold you. I am proof. I am not a perfect man. I am not a soft man. I am a man who kept his name when it mattered. There is more to do. I can feel it gathering. The documents are safe. The bank is alerted. The lawyer is ready. The truth is no longer a private ache in my chest. It is evidence with a report number and a date and a signature that belongs to me. They thought a pen was stronger than a father's spine. They thought wrong. Tonight I slept in my house, in my bed, with my phone on the nightstand face up. The city breathed. The furnace clicked. The mantel clock counted. Somewhere down the block, a bird tried out a thread of song too early for the sun. Morning walks toward me. I'm walking toward it. That is the turn. That is the chapter. That is how I begin again. Feeling invisible and used by own family is hard, isn't it? If you believe everyone deserves justice and to be seen, comment the keyword, justice. Now, watch what they do next. I walked out of that police station just before dawn, the cool air biting my face like a reminder that I was still alive, still standing, still carrying my own name. Behind me, my daughter Rebecca and her husband Mark were booked, charged with attempted poisoning, fraud, and elder abuse. Words I never thought would be tied to my family name are now filled out, official documents stamped and signed. The detective explained that, with the evidence gathered, the tampered whiskey, the papers marked with my name, the testimony from Maria, the case was solid. They would be facing 15 to 20 years if convicted. My legs were tired, but my back felt straighter than it had in years. For once, the weight of fear had shifted off my chest and onto theirs. The courthouse proceedings moved faster than I expected. Within days, a judge ordered their accounts frozen, their travel restricted, their movements monitored. My lawyer, Mr. Harrison, walked me through every detail with his calm voice and steady hands. They'll argue, they'll cry, they'll blame, he told me. But the law is not sentimental. And tonight, you proved that your signature is yours alone. I remember nodding, more to myself than to him. I had kept my dignity when they tried to trade it away like a check with no funds. In the weeks that followed, I made decisions I once thought I was too old to make. I moved a portion of my assets into a charitable trust for community programs in Brooklyn, the kind Margaret used to dream about supporting. $50,000 here for after-school meals, $100,000 there for a scholarship fund. I kept the house in Brooklyn, my anchor, but I also set aside enough to open a new restaurant. Not large, not grand, just honest. I asked Maria to manage it. When I offered, she hesitated, but I told her, "You saved me. You deserve more than a paycheck." She agreed, her eyes shining with the kind of quiet strength that holds a room together. For the first time in decades, I felt peace. Not because everything was perfect, far from it, but because the fear of being used, of being tricked by those who should have loved me, was gone. I wasn't watching shadows in my own house anymore. I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring with another lie dressed up as a request. My nights grew quieter, my mornings softer. I would sit on the porch with my coffee, listen to the city waking, and think, "This is mine. My life is mine again." Rebecca and Mark, on the other hand, collapsed under the weight of their own choices. Their mansion emptied quickly, friends stopped calling, and neighbors whispered behind curtains. The same people who once clapped at their parties now crossed the street when they passed. Rebecca's side of the family, her in-laws, her cousins, sent me letters filled with shame and sorrow. "We raised her better," one aunt wrote. But raising and choosing are two different roads. My daughter had chosen deceit, and deceit will always rot the hands that hold it. Mark's gambling debts became public. The papers ran stories with his name next to words like fraud and betrayal. They had tried to make me the weak one, the burden. Now they were the ones no one wanted to stand beside. One afternoon, a plain envelope arrived at my door. The handwriting was hers. Rebecca. I knew it before I picked it up. I turned it over once, twice, then slid it into the desk drawer without opening it. Some words are not worth reading, not when actions have already spoken loudly. Margaret's picture sat above the drawer. I touched the frame and whispered, "We did all we could. Now it's time to live for us." The weight of tears pressed against my throat, but for once they didn't fall. They dried before they could leave my eyes. I was stronger now, stronger for having survived my own blood's betrayal. I kept busy. I visited the new restaurant often, sat at the corner booth, and watched Maria run the floor with grace. Customers came in, families with kids, older couples, young professionals with tired faces. The food was simple, hearty, the kind Margaret used to make at home. I felt her spirit there, in the smell of roasted chicken, in the laughter around tables, in the kindness Maria showed to a tired father counting change for dessert. It reminded me that giving is still worth it, but giving must be chosen, not stolen. I wasn't a bank to be robbed by lies. I was a man who could decide where his sweat and money would go. In quiet moments, I reflected on the lesson burned into me. Blood is not always family. Family is the people who honor you, who respect your life and labor, who sit with you in silence and still make you feel seen. Betrayal had taught me that hard truth. I repeated it to myself often, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Family is respect, not blood. That sentence became a kind of prayer. I knew many in my generation, people over 60, who feared loneliness more than anything else. I wanted them to hear my story, to see that choosing dignity sometimes means closing doors, even doors tied to your own children, and that it's not the end. It can be a beginning. Rebecca tried again. From jail, she sent another message through a cousin, an apology, a request to meet. I told the cousin kindly but firmly that I was finished. I had set my boundary, and I would not cross it again. Boundaries are not cruel. Boundaries are survival, and survival in my late 60s was no longer about just breathing. It was about living without fear, without chains, without shame. I found joy in small places, walking through the park on crisp mornings, playing chess with a retired bus driver who always talked about the Yankees, attending community meetings not because I had to, but because I wanted to give voice to others like me, people who had been underestimated, ignored, and betrayed by those closest to them. I began to join a local charity group helping set up food drives. Margaret would have smiled at that. I could almost hear her voice teasing, "Took you long enough." If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. The contrast could not have been clearer. While I poured my time into life, Rebecca and Mark sank deeper. They lost their house, repossessed by the bank. They were forced into a rental apartment in a part of town where no one knew their names, and when people did find out, it was only whispers of disgrace. Mark's trial drew headlines for weeks, the words elder abuse in bold. Rebecca, standing beside him in court, no longer looked like the daughter who used to run barefoot through the yard. She looked like a stranger weighed down by her own decisions. I sat in the back row of the courtroom, calm, unbent, watching the judge speak words that confirmed what I already knew. They had lost. The law had caught up with them, but really, they had been losing long before. The night they chose betrayal, they lost themselves. Now I could breathe. Now I could stand in my own kitchen and know no one was plotting behind my back. Now I could sit in the living room, the old clock ticking, the photos lining the mantel, and feel Margaret's presence without the sour taste of fear in my mouth. I would whisper to her, "We're safe now. I made it through. I didn't bend." And in those whispers, I found peace. The greatest gift in all of this was not the money I kept or the house I saved. It was the freedom to live again on my own terms. I began painting, something I had not touched since I was a boy. My hands, though stiff with age, found joy in strokes of color. I attended a weekly community dinner and laughed more than I thought I could. I no longer felt defined by betrayal. I was defined by survival, by resilience, by choice. At night, I would sit near the window, watching the lights of the city spread out like stars, and I would think of those who carry silent wounds from their own families. The lesson is hard, but clear. Blood can betray. Respect heals. True family is those who walk with you in honesty. I carried that message in my chest like a lantern, not heavy but steady, guiding me forward. Rebecca's last letter sits still in that drawer, unopened. It will stay there. My life has moved past the need for excuses. I know what Margaret would say if she were here. She would say, "We gave love. We gave enough. Now give yourself the chance to rest." And I would answer, "I am, Margaret. I am." In the end, I discovered something I had forgotten. I do not need them. I have myself. I have peace. And peace is worth more than all the money in the world. As I step into this new chapter, I feel lighter. The betrayal has been faced. The truth has been spoken. Justice has been served. And my heart is steady. Tomorrow I will join the charity committee, maybe start a small project to help seniors protect their own assets so no one else feels the sting of being treated like a bank instead of a parent. It feels right. It feels like the future. I whisper once more into the quiet house, "I don't need them anymore. I have myself." And with those words, Chapter 5 closes, leading me into a new beginning. I wake each morning now with a kind of quiet that I once thought was impossible. My old house in Brooklyn still stands, steady as it has for decades, but it no longer feels like a place haunted by betrayal. It feels like mine again. The rooms hold laughter from the past, not shadows of deceit. Margaret's photo smiles down from the mantel, and when I brew my coffee, I whisper to her, "We made it, love. We survived them." The bitterness has faded, replaced by a calm rhythm of life I choose for myself. I began spending more time with the local senior center, volunteering a few afternoons each week. Many of the men and women there carried their own stories of loss, of being taken advantage of by children, relatives, or so-called friends. As I listened, I felt my own pain reflected by me, but I also felt something else: purpose. I spoke openly about what happened with Rebecca and Mark. I told them how I froze my accounts, how I refused to be silenced, how I held the line. Some nodded with tears in their eyes, others clutched my hand. "You gave me courage," one woman whispered. And in that moment, I knew Margaret would be proud. The foundation I set up began to grow. We helped seniors with legal advice, small grants for housing, and even seminars about protecting their savings. When I signed the check transferring $200,000 into that fund, I felt lighter. Money that once weighed me down with fear was now a tool to lift others. I didn't need mansions or flashy investments. What I needed was peace of mind, and I had it. Rebecca and Mark's world, meanwhile, collapsed completely. Court records became public, and newspapers ran the story for weeks. Their faces, once painted with pride at fancy dinners, now stared back from headlines about elder abuse and fraud. The sentence was heavy, 15 years minimum. They lost everything: the house, the cars, the false friends who once praised them. I heard Mark tried to negotiate a deal by blaming Rebecca, and she tried to cry her way through the hearings. But the evidence was too strong, the betrayal too clear. In the end, they stood alone. No family to defend them, no community to rally around them. Even their in-laws turned away, ashamed. I could have read Rebecca's letters. I knew they were filled with apologies, excuses, maybe even pleas for forgiveness. But I didn't. I slipped them into the desk drawer, unopened, and left them there. Words can't erase actions. I spoke softly to Margaret one night, holding her photo in my hands. I don't need their apologies. I have myself. I have my peace. One afternoon, a small envelope arrived, not from Rebecca, but from a family who had received help from the fund. A mother wrote about how the scholarship paid for her daughter's first year of college, how the girl wanted to study nursing. She enclosed a photo of the girl holding her acceptance letter, smiling widely. I sat there, staring at the picture, feeling tears press against my eyes. For the first time in years, they weren't tears of sorrow. There were tears of gratitude. My money, my life's sweat, was no longer being stolen or wasted. It was building something real, something Margaret and I would have been proud of together. I often walk through the park now, especially in the late afternoon when the sun stretches long shadows over the benches. Children play, couples stroll, the air feels lighter. I sit, breathe deeply, and let the golden light wrap around me. Sometimes I whisper out loud, I don't need their forgiveness. I have my life, and it is enough. People passing by may think I am just an old man talking to himself. But I know better. I am an old man reminding himself of the truth. The lessons have carved themselves into me, and I want others to hear them too. For parents, do not let your sacrifices become chains. Giving to your children should be an act of love, not a contract of control. Protect yourself, set boundaries, and never let guilt blind you to disrespect. For children, greed will rot every bond you have. Respect is worth more than inheritance, and love is worth more than a bank account. And for all of us, in this modern world where money and power seem to twist so easily, remember this: character is the only inheritance that truly lasts. It cannot be stolen, cannot be forged, cannot be bought. Rebecca and Mark now live in a world of walls and bars. I live in a world of open skies. That is the contrast. Their choices bound them. My choices freed me. Sometimes people ask if I miss them, if I feel lonely without the daughter I raised. The truth is simple. I miss who she used to be, not who she became. And missing someone who no longer exists is not loneliness. It is acceptance. I joined a community garden last spring. My hands, though stiff, remembered the soil. I planted tomatoes, peppers, and even a row of marigolds just for the color. Neighbors would stop and talk, and I began to feel connected again. Not through blood, but through kindness. That is real family. The people who see you, who value you, who respect the lines you draw. As the months passed, I began painting again too. A canvas stood in the corner of my new study, and each morning I added a little more color. I painted the Brooklyn Bridge at dawn, the park at sunset, even Margaret's face from an old photo. Each brushstroke was mine, owned by no one else, dictated by no one else. It felt like freedom in its purest form. When I think of Rebecca's last attempt to reach me, I feel no anger, only clarity. She made her bed, and now she lies in it. I will not read her apologies. I will not invite chaos back into my life. The chapter is closed. The book is finished. My future is mine alone. The other day, sitting with a group at the senior center, someone asked me what I had learned through all this. I smiled and answered simply, "Family is not just blood. Family is respect. Parents, never let your giving erase your worth. Children, never think inheritance is love. And for all of us, the only wealth that never fades is dignity. Shy, they nodded, some with tears in their eyes, and I knew my story mattered. I walked home that evening under a sky streaked with pink and orange, the city buzzing around me. I felt whole. I finally understood that every day forward was not about loss, but about living right. I whispered one last time to Margaret, I finally found where I belong. Each day proves we chose right. And with that, I closed the chapter of betrayal, carrying with me the only inheritance no one can ever steal, my self-respect. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.